Big Debate, I'm Kim Kabateli. Images of police shooting at protesters are stuck in our minds from the days of apartheid. Never again, we promised ourselves in 1994. Then the Marikana massacre hit the headlines, striking miners mowed down by police. If it had been a single event on an otherwise spotless record, we may not be having this debate. But it came after years of increased concern about police repression, corruption and brutality. Today on The Big Debate, we ask, are the police out of control? I'm joined by Nathi Mthethwa, Minister of Police, Professor Adam Habib, the incoming Vice-Chancellor at Wits University, Patrick Craven, the national spokesperson of COSATU, Gareth Newham from the Institute for Security Studies, and Yusuf Abramji, one of the founders of crime-fighting initiative Lead SA. And in our audience, we have police officers, police specialists, South Africans from different communities, trade unionists, researchers, activists, and friends of the police. Welcome to you all. Before we start our debate, let's set the scene.
There are about 10,000 gatherings in South Africa annually. Where the issues hit hardest, protests often turn violent. In Sasolburg at the start of this year, it was about demarcation. Bullet Tulo got caught in the crossfire. A few days later, his family were preparing to bury him.
We've got a phone call from one of his friends saying that Bullet has been shot. We are very devastated. We are still coming in terms of our loss.
When events turned violent, the police were called in.
They've got a rubber bullet, stun grenades, tear gas. It's not the way they must deal with protesters by using live ammunition.
I opened the business on Monday morning. I had to close 2 hours after, on the Monday and the Tuesday, by instruction of the police coming down the streets with loudspeakers and saying that trouble's on its way.
But who started the trouble, police or protesters? And what could the police realistically do when chaos erupted?
They could have protested. I just feel that they didn't have to go that far as to breaking businesses down, and stealing. And we are here to create jobs. And if you do that, we can't.
The concerned group, did try and talk to, relevant, authorities. Many of their grievances were not, taken into account. Becoming violent was seen like as a last, resort.
The spectre of an apartheid police force cracking down on protesters is something that was buried with the reinvention of the old SAP as a service after democracy.
By 1997, I remember a conversation between the Premier of the province, the MEC of Safety and Security, and I was sitting in on the conversation, and we were talking about what to do with all the tear gas we inherited from Mangope, because we were no longer using it. We were resolving conflict without violence. And, this is why it's so tragic now that you see the reintroduction of tear gas, the reintroduction of rubber bullets, the reintroduction of dogs, and so on to resolve conflicts with communities.
Acting for communities who've been denied their constitutional right to protest, Simon Delaney says the laws are fine, but police training is a problem.
The means of expressing dissatisfaction with our government's performance depends on who you are as a South African. So if you are poor and marginalized and female and black, there's very limited, avenues for you to express your dissatisfaction. Going onto the street and saying enough is enough, I don't have the levers of political power to effect change, but when I go into the street, I'm arrested. Why? Because I'm in violation of the Regulation of Gatherings Act.
In the last decade, more than 100 protesters have been killed by police. Over 900 people died in police custody just last year. Activists are now arming themselves with legal training.
The way the police behave is an anti-state of emergency. Now the very same so-called liberation movement is applying the apartheid tactics now on its own people.
A lot of these protests involve either bannings of the protests themselves or the jailing of the activists, mostly obviously the leaders.
Rising protest has coincided with rampant crime and huge public and political pressure on the police to clamp down on lawlessness. After apartheid, the South African police abolished military ranks and replaced them with a civilian rank structure. But in 2010, military ranks were reintroduced. A commissioner is a general once more. What does this say about the style of policing?
Your discretion is advised.
In 2011, Andries Tatane died at the hands of protest police in Vicksburg, in full view of the world. The court acquitted them for lack of evidence. In 2012, 34 striking mine workers were shot dead and 78 injured when the police opened fire at Marikana. This year, taxi driver Mido Masia was dragged behind a police van and died in police cells. Is it in the rising tide of emotion over lawlessness that protesters get tarred with the same brush as criminals? In his State of the Nation address, President Zuma said he had instructed the security cluster to deal with violent protests speedily.
The law must be enforced, and it must be seen to be enforced.
The issue here is that people are feeling that the government is not listening to them. They only listen to them when they've turned violent. When you have special calls, basically you criminalizing them.
Minister Nathi Mthethwa, Minister of the Police, we've all seen the images of a man being dragged by a police vehicle, that ultimately leading to his death. You've had 4 years in office to fix this problem. You haven't. Don't you think it's time to resign?
Perhaps let me start by saying that the recent events have been tragic indeed. And I think that everybody have heard what you have said about that and what has been done on that.
According to your own statistics, 932 people have died in police custody in the past year. That cannot be acceptable even to you.
It can't be acceptable. That's precisely the point. We had to strengthen the civilian oversight over the police because police officers and police force anywhere in the world is one force which has enormous power, and if that power is not checked, it leads to unwanted things like fatalities and so on. There's been enormous violence in the strikes, in some of the public protests. It hasn't been an easy job for the police to police in South Africa today with all the challenges which you are faced with.
Adam Habib, fair point. I mean, it's a big job. Crime levels are high. Police are being killed in the line of duty. Collateral damage?
I think that the criticism against the minister alone is probably slightly unfair. I think that it has to be directed at a whole range of the leadership in government. We seem to have confused the transformation of the police service with the narrow racialization of it. We denuded the investigative capacities of the police quite deliberately by the choices, policy choices of an ANC government after 2000. The Zuma administration recognized some of the problems, but tried to look for shortcut solutions. And what did it say? Well, we'll match force with force. And so they openly said shoot to kill. They openly said take on criminals.
And the public applauded them.
That's right. And middle-class people applauded them in the society because they were full of violence.
Patrick Craven, your members have made it worse by actually becoming more violent against the police. You've added to an existing problem.
Of course there is an existing problem, and it's much broader than the police. It's tensions within society as a whole, basically between the haves and the have-nots, which are wider in South Africa than anywhere else in the world. It's a recipe for violence. But that's all the more reason why the police should be disciplined and conscientious in doing everything possible to manage that violence and to minimize it. The police are supposed to be a disciplined force, and clearly they're not. And I think what...
Minister, so the police are out of control.
The policy choices which Habib is talking about, relating specifically on the matter of crowd control, the public order policy was de-established, which has been re-established now, to particularly be sensitive on some of the things, as correctly as Craven is saying.
Gareth, help us out here. Who is it? Is it the demonstrators? Is it the police? What's the problem?
This is not a new problem, and it really did start on Jackie Celebi in about 2005, 2006. In spite of a 64% increase between 2002 and 2005 of violent public protests, Jackie Celebi shut down the specialised units. He denuded that structure so that half the number of people were trained and able to do this work. At the same time, bringing in 70,000 more police officials since 2002. Vetting systems couldn't cope, training systems couldn't cope, the training time was halved. So what we're seeing now in the last few years is the consequences of those early policy decisions. The minister's now trying to undo those, reintroducing specialised units,
yes,
bringing back public order policing. It's going to take some time, and it also requires a holistic approach. There's not a quick fix on this.
Many people have pointed to the remilitarization as being at the root of the problem. Would you agree to that?
Well, look, I think that's a bit simplistic because there wasn't really much of a remilitarization other than a lot of rhetoric and the change in ranks.
But can I respond to that?
Yes.
Because it seems to me that rhetoric has consequences. When the minister stands up and says, you shoot to kill, it has consequences. The minister, the president, and senior members of the ANC have to take responsibility for creating a culture of impunity.
I think Habib is simplistic here. The shoot you are talking about was very specific. It was specific at the time where our country was being run down by anarchists. People, when the public protest, police know that there, when you are faced with those people, you don't have to shoot people out there. We're talking about cash in transit heists here. People have been killing people in the streets in South Africa, in front of everyone, including people who are criticizing what police are saying.
See, the problem is this, Chair. Many middle-class people in South African society, they were so full of crime that they said, kill the bastards. And instead of our leadership saying, that's not the way to respond, we don't suspend our values when we deal with crime.
In fact, let me bring Yusuf Abramji into this, because you deal with a lot of middle-class people. They were very happy when the rhetoric about shoot to kill happened, up until things went out of control. And then suddenly fingers were pointed at the minister.
I think, Siki, we must first place on record that the majority of policemen, in my view, are hardworking and dedicated. But there are many rotten apples, and that is our problem. If the police want our respect, they must first respect us, the public. Very, very important. And I think more importantly, Siki, here we have a police code of conduct, right, which every policeman should be taking. The minister will tell you when he or she becomes a policeman. This code of conduct should not only be on a website, it should be in the heart and mind of every policeman each and every day. And today I call on the minister. To take this code of conduct, Mr. Minister, back to every policeman. Let them reaffirm, let them re-adopt this policy, because the one line says it all, that me as a policeman will uphold the fundamental rights of every person, and many rotten policemen are not.
Patrick Craven, it's just rotten apples that are doing this.
And that's why we share the concern at the number of police officers who've been killed. Many of them are our members. And I think it is partly related to this militarization, which I don't think is trivial. And I think if there's one positive step that could come out of this debate, if the minister would hear on SABC say, we're going to scrap these apartheid military ranks, let's call them by their proper name.
Let me hear what the minister has to say about that.
You can call police officers with whatever name. What we've done in amending public order policing is to do all sorts of things which Craven is talking about. That it's not only about shooting, but it is about conflict management. It is about the kind of equipment which we have secured. It is about what police do. It is about their values. It is about what guides the police. This very code of conduct we are talking about is something we start on, and it's something we emphasize all the time.
Okay. After the break, we talk to someone whose friend died in his arms after being shot by the police, and we ask if South Africans are guilty of criminalizing the poor. You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to the big debate on policing. Andries Tatane was a 33-year-old South African who died during a service delivery protest in Vicksburg in April 2011 after being beaten by the police. Molefi Nonyane was Andries Tatane's friend and held him in his arms as he lay dying. And Molefi is with us here today. Molefi, just talk to us a little bit about that.
I know for a fact that the province of the Free State does not condone what happened, but maybe the problem would be with the support that the seven gentlemen are getting from the MEC himself. And this included 2 weeks ago in the morning breakfast where he explained to the people or the viewers how Andries was posing a danger. And as far as I know, in South Africa, we don't have no suicide bombers because Andries was all naked and all. And he was in no way we could say that his death was warranted.
Minister, you know, people seem to be losing confidence in the police. Should politicians be closing ranks around the police who have been accused of something?
I can tell you that each and every week we are in one or the other community, interacting with the community, not because there's something which has happened, but because we take initiative, we go to the community, because we know that the main pillar for police to succeed in fighting crime, they have to work with people. We get concerned when people raise issues about police, when people raise the lack of confidence of the police, precisely because some of the police have acted in a particular way. And that cannot be condoned by anybody. And we've never condoned that.
All right. Zaki Ahmed, you with the Social Justice Coalition, and the minister's doing his best. And he makes the point that it's not everybody. They are going into communities, they're doing the best that they can under the circumstances with the current structure of the policing.
I don't believe that the majority of police are hardworking. I don't believe that the majority of police are decent. I believe that they are led criminally, and I firmly believe that if you look at a place like Kailicha, where I work almost on a daily basis, there are more disciplinary offences against the police than there are police. And that comes from a Commissioner's Task Team report. And I would say to the Minister, there are 720 deaths last year. You spend 200 million rand a year paying police who criminally assault us, who spend more time arresting young working class black men for carrying pocket knives than actually fighting the real criminals.
Minister?
There would be police who are not doing what they are supposed to do and what they are commanded to do. We have a number of police officers who are arrested on continuous basis by their own colleagues who are police officers, precisely because members of SABC cannot condone criminality, even if that is by their own.
Why were there only 13 convictions after 700 deaths in police custodies? Why only 13 convictions?
We are talking about criminal justice system. You should know better.
Isn't it because the police investigate themselves, Minister?
No,
Isn't it because the police investigate themselves?
They are not investigating themselves. They are investigated by IPID,
which has no power.
Yeah. All right. Let me hear what Adam Habib has to say. You seem to be interested in this.
The problem at the moment is too often when people die, there are conflicting signals. When Marikana happened, there wasn't a standard line that came out that said this was unacceptable. The police commissioner herself tried to explain why Marikana happened. How can you explain and justify the murder of 34 people? You should simply say, it's unacceptable, we're going to act, and we'll deal with the police, and we'll deal with all of those who have committed crime.
there's never been any signal of commending such action. And we have acknowledged that there is a problem, and we have said there is a real issue of police working in very difficult situations, which makes the stress levels even go high. And that is no justification of the actions which are done, which are committed by the police, which are wrong. But there is a particular context which I don't think that we should just trivialize.
The minister is saying that obviously there are circumstances under which police are operating, but he makes the point that that is no excuse for some of what we have seen.
We need to have a user-friendly approach, you know, when servicing our people. We have championed this, we have joined with the department in ensuring that this becomes a reality. But where there are deficiencies, I strongly believe that both of us, as a department and a union, and unions that are operating here, need to find one another and address the problem.
Gareth, we seem to have a problem with accountability. You know, I'm not hearing people saying I'm taking responsibility for this and I'm going to take responsibility for that.
Well, I think that's at the core of the problem. When we're talking about bad police officers, there were over 5,000 disciplinary cases that were set up last year. 1 in 30%, the most likely outcome was nothing. Case withdrawn, acquittal. About 500 people got dismissed. And I think that points to the system. And the National Development Plan actually has some quite good recommendations. For instance, assess all the senior managers, starting from the National Commissioner, Deputy National Commissioners, Provincial National Commissioners, Divisional Heads, so that you can see what the objective criteria is required. Do they have the skills, the qualifications, the expertise, and the attitudes to hold those positions? Because it's a massive organization, and mistakes there will trickle down and lead to death and torture and brutality. It's about putting the best possible leadership team in place, putting a clear plan of action, and then implementing it rigorously so that you promote, support, encourage good police officials, and you get rid of those police officials who are bringing the organization down, and that'll start changing the dynamic. And you can do that within a year.
Within a year?
Yes.
Can I just pick up on a few points? The training of policemen, on police officers rather, has to become a priority. This attitude of skit and scop and donor must come to an end, because we have a constitution and we have a Bill of Rights and we have human rights. And I think a lot of police officers are not abiding by our constitution, and that's the crux of our problem.
Talk about vulnerable communities. And maybe, Sally, we can talk a little bit to you. You're from Sweat. Those are sex workers who are vulnerable, don't have many choices, but their clients tend to be among the well-heeled. Who actually gets into it with the police more often?
Well, absolutely, the sex workers themselves. Clients are very, very rarely arrested, or if they are, they're usually taken to an ATM and money is withdrawn to bribe the police officers. In 70% of sex workers who complain to us or seek legal advice from us have experienced police violence. Of over 1,000 sex workers that we asked the question of, 55% said they'd experienced violence from police officers. It's a significant issue, it's a systemic issue, which is why I can understand the question around police training. I absolutely support that. But without disciplinary procedures to address the problem, to get rid of police officers who are problematic, we will not find a change.
Another vulnerable group being our migrants. Often they're undocumented, and even if they are documented, they're still treated in a terrible manner. Look at what happened with Masia.
It's so frequently the case now that people, our member organizations, community groups, and so on, are reporting that although they are the ones that are suffering the crime, shops being attacked and looted of non-nationals, if they report the crime, the police might come, but they just stand there and watch while the looting takes place and do nothing. Again, if they go and report crimes in the police station, there's so many cases where people are just not taken seriously. They're given a case number, they're not asked for details. You know, this is commonplace. And so I do agree, it must be. We can only conclude there is something systemic about this problem.
Let me get the Minister to respond. I mean, as much as South Africans are generally prejudiced, it looks like even the police are prejudiced in how to deal with those people, Minister.
All of those things are not something which I would say to you here, they are going to be overnight, as I would wish to follow Gareth, that 1 year,
do it in a year.
You'd have done everything. But I can tell you that some of those people are being arrested by their own police officers, by their own colleagues, as it were.
All right. When we come back, we ask whether law enforcement in South Africa should be used as a tool for transforming our unequal society, and whether South Africans are really equal before the law. This is The Big Debate.
Law enforcement in the highly unequal setting of the Northwest Province platinum mines has brought the country to a crossroads.
Those who are powerful in this country, the rich, those who own the mining corporations and so on, now have a restored faith in the police. The police will be prepared to take lethal force in strike situations.
South African mines have a near monopoly on the world production of platinum, and they determine labour policy, which has left local communities and workers still in poverty.
Google Earth any mine in South Africa and you'll find the squatter camp behind the hostels. The fact that our mine workers have to live in zinc shacks, it's completely unacceptable. And I don't think any government or any South African should accept that. The government should be more even-handed in the manner it uses the police in these disputes. It should not every time send in the police to do the labour relations of the mining corporation.
If the police are deployed to keep people in check, what about keeping business in check? At least one law enforcement agency is tasked with keeping corporate South Africa accountable. The Competition Commission investigates companies for taking the poor for a ride by fixing prices in crucial industries from bread to fuel.
Now, as South Africa, we come from a legacy of anti-competitive behavior. I think our economy for a very long time was built on exclusion and exploitation. And that has become embedded in the culture of business, where in many ways it's seen that whatever you do in the market is completely up to you. It's an ethically neutral zone, anything goes. And if you exclude someone through unfair mechanisms, that's just survival of the fittest.
But while guilty companies can get fines between 5 or 10% of their turnover, the poor, when on the receiving end of law enforcement, may end up losing their freedom or their lives.
Minister, what you should be doing is using our policemen to actually go after the big, rich, white-collar criminals rather than criminalizing the poor.
Well, a criminal is a criminal. If you are involved in crime, whether you are a white or a black or a poor, crime is crime.
How often do you go after the well-connected, the well-heeled, who actually can afford?
There is no way that people will have to be left and do anything in the country and cause anarchy and then be sympathetic that because they are poor, they must do anything. No, it can't.
Patrick, you want to add to that?
No, I thought the insert brought out what I think is a fundamental part of this debate. That is the class politics of policing. There's no question about it. If you're wealthy, can afford good lawyers, you will not be treated in the same way as if you're in a poor community in Khayelitsha. Let's not forget that in the Davidson incident, until the video footage was shown on television, the senior police officers were denying it. That was their instinctive response. Close ranks, defend. What we need is people at the top and a genuinely independent complaints commission, which is completely outside, which says no. We're going to have a zero-tolerance approach to action like that.
Well, let's hear what the audience has to say about that. So if you're poor in South Africa, you don't get policing.
Not all police are criminals, as it is suggested. There are very good police officers out there who are doing us proud. A few weeks ago, we witnessed barbarism at the Cape where Anene Boysens was brutalized and killed by young boys, and police acted swiftly. I wonder what would have happened if if police arrived in the process of them committing that to Anene, and upon them trying to arrest them and they resist arrest and they fight police. Should police kiss and kettle them and say, no, bravo, you're doing good? No, the nature of the police work demands that under such circumstances, they must exercise force. Thank you very much.
Exercise force and kill them?
Not kill them, of course, apply force such that their power to assault police is minimized and they are arrested as it is required.
And Gareth, maybe you want to speak to this point.
Well, the law is very clear. The force has to be minimal and proportionate to the job that needs to be done. So the police never shoot to kill. They must believe that their lives are in direct danger, that somebody else's life is in direct danger, or that another person, if they let them get away, is likely to cause imminent bodily threat to somebody else. They've committed various serious violent crime in the past, and there's no way to arrest them now or in the future. So the police know this. This is part of the training. But it's not just the legislation. It goes back, and to explain a bit more, not a year to fix all the problems in the police, but a year to make sure that the top management team, every single lieutenant general and major general, is of the caliber needed to make sure that it's not just learn the law, but it's about, I look up and I see a management team that is a professional management team that I trust, and they set the tone and put a plan in place so that we do fix these systemic problems.
But Garrett, how can you have a police commissioner with a non-career policeman leading the fight against crime? Come on, explain that.
You can have the best equipment in the world. You can train people. But there are two things you have to fix if we're going to fix the problem. The first is the culture, the institutional culture. You can be the best trained policeman in the world. If you've got an institutional culture of impunity, of killing, you will have serious deaths in custody. The second is that any institution is led from the top. If you don't fix the top, I think it's absolutely true it will seep through the bottom. For the last three commissioners that were appointed were political commissioners. They were political deployees. The problem with political deployees is when they become corrupt, you can't act. 2 out of the last 3 commissioners were corrupt in our society. What does it say about our police? That's what we've got to fix up.
Minister, before you respond to that, I just want to just round it up a little bit by saying, are you willing to take that on board and say, right, maybe there is something wrong with a political appointment of a commissioner? We need career policemen, people who have gone up the ranks and shown that they can do what they do.
The National Commissioner of Police is somebody who should have capacity to manage and supervise police officers. It means it doesn't follow then that because you have been a career police, you therefore possesses managerial skills to manage the police.
Managerial skill is not abstracted from context. You have to understand management within the police service. You have to understand how stations operate. You have to understand the challenges that police are confronted with.
All right, we do need to move on. We do need to move on from this point, because the point that I want us to get to now is about the poor, the inequality question that we were talking about. And Jane, I'm going to ask you to just maybe respond to this question. Are we criminalizing the poor?
If we look at a municipality like Rustenburg, for instance, we did some research in the municipal records of the municipality, and we found that last year 53% of protests have been prohibited. And the vast majority of those protests have been prohibited on grounds that were not recognized by the Regulation of Gatherings Act. And what happens when that happens? People feel the injustice, and they get out onto the streets anyway because they don't want their voices to be silenced. And then we see the spiral of violence taking place. The other thing I think that we haven't really touched on sufficiently is the abuse of the criminal justice system in order to criminalize dissent. There are activists sitting behind me from the Makawuse community, and 2 of those activists were arrested recently and prosecuted for what? For incitement. And why? For wearing Marikana support campaign T-shirts. That is an abuse of the criminal justice system, to criminalize and penalize the poor for being poor.
I'm out on a bail, appearing at court again on the 3rd of June, charged by Primrose Station Commander for intimidation. We were organizing actually a protest to challenge the brutality we are facing from the Primrose Police Station. The station commander ordered the Metro Police to cancel our protest. After every process was followed and everything was legal, then the following day, which we're supposed to go on the street, then I was phoned by the Metro Police to say our protest has been cancelled. about 45 motor vehicles of the police was there to make sure that we don't get to the street, because the station commander and the generals from the top said if we start marching against the police, the Makausi will turn into be another Marikana.
All right.
That was the threat.
Nobody is negating some of the issues that have been raised by people here today in terms of some of the incidents and things that have happened, and I think the Minister's made it clear. But I think the impression is being created that nothing is happening around those issues. And I just wanted to raise that there are a number of steps that have been taken. We've spoken about the public order policing policy. That policy was introduced specifically to respond to the need to professionally police public protests by the Minister himself. IPID, I hear what people are saying about some of the cases around IPID, and we recognise a need to increase IPID's capacity. But one of the first things the Minister did was to say the police cannot police themselves, and we need stronger legislation with regard to IPID. Look at the Minister's 10-point plan that the Minister has been crisscrossing across the country, meeting with station commissioners saying, this is what we expect from you. Point number 1, transformation. Not just about equity and race, but about the type of police officer we want to see, a police officer that upholds the Constitution and respects the Bill of Rights. And I would urge members of the audience and the public here to look deeper at what is going on with the 10-point plan, with the green paper on safety and security, with the public order policing policy, and what we're actually saying in that policy, all of which are initiatives that have been taken by this administration and by the Minister.
All right. Thank you.
While Mido was being dragged behind the police van, I expected the Minister himself to respond with immediate effect, or rather cancel your honeymoon and come back home and do whatever.
All right. Minister, do you want to respond to that? Do you want to respond to that at all?
To what?
To his call that you should have said something as soon as the tragic incident happened.
Well,
that you should have come back from your honeymoon.
We did say something. We followed up the matter. The people were suspended, including those ones which were referred to here, that they tried to cover. They were suspended.
When we return, we're going to ask our audience and our panel here in Johannesburg for their views on what needs to be done to fix the problems with our police. You're watching The Big Debate. Welcome back to The Big Debate. We are asking, are the police out of control? And if so, what needs to be done? So what do you think? Tweet us on @BigDebate on S2 or visit our Facebook page, The Big Debate on SABC2. Now, let's hear from our audience here in downtown Johannesburg.
Ordinary citizens don't wake up in the morning and decide to go on a protest. It is as a result of negligent and reckless politicians and lazy, incompetent government department officials, which leads to the people with anger react in the way they react. And when these people come to a canvass for votes, the police are nowhere to be seen. And when they fail to deliver, they hide behind the police because the police don't have.
Police are working on their own. As much as we've got CPFs, those CPFs are there just to listen to what the police are saying. I think they're not involving the communities.
We are not going to have even our minister resigning or our commissioner. Minister, we support you, even our government and ANC, we support you. Continue with your job, and your job, it is good.
I think the comrade there with the red cap, he's not from South Africa. He hasn't been beaten by the police. He hasn't been beaten by the police. The police are cruel. They beat you up while in custody in cells. I'm a victim. 15 April 2010. Been arrested, pepper sprayed in the cell, beaten to a pulp.
The reputation of the policing system in South Africa is under threat. So I'm actually wondering if there'll ever be a tipping point where we say enough is enough. We've had enough violence already, and there need to be systematic structures that will address the issue of violence and the issue of police brutality.
Police doing labor relations in organizations, I think that must come to a stop. Police has been trained to perform the duty of maintaining law and order. but cannot be utilizing in the labor relations issues in the companies.
Police usually they act with revenge. Both the Mito case and the Marikana massacre, there were traces of revenge there.
We have seen in Tshwane where police were bragging about using 5,000 rubber bullets, even live ammunition, to shoot at defenseless people. The minister should train the police at shooting ranges. They shouldn't use protesters as targets.
There are police officers who should not be police officers in the first place. You have identified that as a problem. But my question for you to be able to address that is, how do you prevent that continuing within the police while you are trying to get those people out who are already in the system?
Let's get a wrap from the panel. Hear what your responses are, and I suppose what you might pick up from what the audience members have also said to us. And Yusuf, I'll start with you.
Well, I think first of all, there's no doubt for me, Siki, the image of the police has been severely tainted, locally and abroad. And then if the police wants to improve the image, they need to change their behavior. And I think very, very importantly, what Professor Adam Habib said repeatedly, we need professional policing. And I think we need to use technology to their advantage. I can't understand in today's times, every police vehicle, why don't they have a camera equipped in every vehicle with sound to look at their behavior? So I think there's a combination of factors that will lead us to where the police ought to be going.
Minister, you know, if the views expressed here represent half of what the country thinks, then we got a serious legitimacy crisis of the police. And a legitimacy crisis of the police is not good for any one of us, because it undermines the prospects for the possibility of a democracy. Now, I think that there's some things you're doing right. I think the policy initiatives, the re-establishment of some of the structures that were closed, the training, the new equipment. But if we don't do two things, we're dead in the water. The first is changing the institutional culture. You have great police services around the world. Go to the US, go to LA, go to New York. But as long as the culture changes, the institutional culture doesn't change. And that's an issue of practice, not policy. As long as that doesn't change, we got a problem. And the only way you're going to change that is if we send a very strong message that citizens are meant to be protected. Anybody that dies, we will act with the full force of the law from the top, from the president down. The second, you have to professionalize the police, not only at the middle and the bottom, but at the top itself. Because if we don't address those two things, the crises will continue, the legitimacy crisis of the police will continue, and South Africans as a whole will lose out.
Thanks, Adam. Gareth?
Well, as I said earlier, the National Development Plan says a lot of this. So it's been adopted by the Cabinet, it's been accepted by the governing party, and I think it's about now making that a reality through a clear plan. So in the next year, let's see that assessment of the senior managers taking place so that every citizen, every police officer on the ground who faces difficulties can know that the people at the top are putting a plan together to deal with all these systemic problems: training, recruitment, vetting, accountability, discipline, and promotions. And then all of us have a huge and very important role to play. If we are victims of police abuses, if we witness police misconduct, we must speak out, we must use the channels, we must go to IPID, we must report it to the police themselves. On the one hand. On the other hand, it's critically important that when you do come across policemen and women who are putting their lives at risk, who are working in difficult conditions, but they still maintain true to the calling of police officials, that we recognize them, we support them, we encourage them, we write letters to their supervisors so they realize that we're not the enemy. It's not the police on one side and communities on the other side. It's all of us together, and that's very important. We don't lose sight of that.
The debate tonight has shown quite clearly that we have huge problems. Far too many people are dying, far too many people are being beaten up, and far too many police officers are still requesting bribes. I think we have to strengthen the trade unions in the police, which hasn't been mentioned, because I think they could play a critical role as acting as a watchdog, and they often do. I know there have been many cases where it's been pop crew themselves who've identified big problems within the police, and that should be recognised. And secondly, an absolutely ruthless purging of those police chiefs who've been found to be guilty of these various offences. And finally, I think when it comes to public order, the police need to work with the people. I think the story from Primrose was very illustrative. Here was an opportunity for the police to talk to the demonstrators, to work out ways of managing the protests, but instead just cancelled it. It's just asking for trouble if you take that sort of arrogant approach to legitimate constitutional public protest.
Minister?
There's been fundamental points made here. If I may just pick one, which touch to other areas, is the whole issue of transformation. Transformation here, as we emphasized, not only from the race point of view or from the demographics, but transformation as we have spelled out. We've been doing this thing, but this time around we thought we needed to get into the grassroots, where we have under one roof all the station commanders all over the country. Talk to them that this is what we want, this is the path we are taking. Police should serve, protect and respect the public, because the successes which police pride themselves with today is because of the involvement of the public. So there is no way that we'll disrespect the role played by the public. At the same time, would urge the public to really understand the fact that there are laws in the country. Demonstration, okay. Picketing, okay. Strikes and everything, but unarmed. And if all of us can emphasize that point, that people should not be armed in these demonstrations, so that we know that the task of ensuring that South Africans are and feel safe becomes the task of all of us. We'll continue engaging communities. We'll continue pointing out to those things and dealing with those elements which are not supposed to be in the police.
People in South Africa, we all rely on the police. Every day, thousands of men and women in uniform risk their lives to keep us safe. But in their efforts to get tough on crime, have the police lost their way? And if they are out of control, do their leaders have the vision and the will to fix the problem? You decide. Thank you for watching The Big Debate.